Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10:15, and we're going to go ahead and get started. On behalf of the class of 1994, thank you for coming out this morning. And you all get a gold star because you are the ones who are awake. So give yourself a round of applause. So, are there any folks here who are not from the class of 1994? Thank you so much for coming. We love it. No, you look 18, ma'am. So, this morning, we are talking about what is the fate of education. Obviously, we went to Amherst College, so we figure you all care about education. So we're hoping this will be a good time for you. What we're going to do this morning is my panelists are going to introduce themselves, and then I have some questions for them that are targeted around specific areas of education. And after they chat, then we're going to open it up to you all for questions. We want to give a nice thank you to Sarah, who is a rising junior from Amherst College. She's going to be our microphone runner. So when we do get to the point where we ask you if you have any questions or any thoughts you want to share, please share your name and the class you graduated from. And please wait for Sarah to come with the microphone because they are taping this. So we want to make sure that they can actually hear your questions. So again, good morning. My name is Paula Castner. I'm actually a part of this panel, and even though I'm separated, but we also needed a moderator as well, so I'm doing both roles this morning. So I actually, when I came to Amherst College, I came from an inner city school outside of New York where the students threw desks at the teachers. Yeah. And even though I was valedictorian of my class, I was in no way, shape, or form prepared for the type of thinking that the Amherst classes demanded of me. So I actually started taking steps to transfer out of Amherst to go to Columbia, because of course Columbia wouldn't ask me to think, right? But I had a meeting with Professor Howard Chickering. I don't know if anybody happened to have Chickering as a professor. Absolutely fabulous professor. He sat me down and he explained to me, as only Chickering can do, that Amherst College would teach me how to think in ways that I never could imagine, that it would like literally blow my mind what I was capable of doing, because of course I was feeling like a failure, here at Amherst my first semester. And I took him at his word. I didn't transfer, didn't go to Columbia. And what happened was, lo and behold, I learned that I actually could think in a lot of different ways, and I gained a lot of confidence in myself. And when I think about education, I think about people who empower other people. And I've taken that with me, and in my 30th reunion from 30 years from Amherst, I've been in education for 30 years in a lot of different roles. And everything that I have done has been about empowering the next generation in any way, shape, or form that I can, the way that Professor Chickering did for me. So, Seth, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you, Paula, and thank you for 30 years of 30 years of service. Seth Reynolds, and when I graduated from Amherst in 1994, the only thing I considered doing was teaching. I felt like I knew I was incredibly privileged to have this experience, and that was what I was going to do. And essentially, I remember people would be running around, and I now work in a consulting firm, so I see all the people now. And I remember people running around in suits going to their interviews, and I had no idea what they were doing. So I applied to Teach for America in a Jesuit school in Boston. The Jesuit school didn't have a job for me, and so they sent me to Los Angeles, where I was a bilingual fifth grade teacher, and saw how far away, frankly, my students were from being able to have what we had here. And so over the years, I now run our education practice. So we consult with higher education institutions, K-12 school districts, states, as well as companies in the education sector. And there's a lot of issues that keep people from getting to the kind of quality that we have here, as well as in high school. Some of it's that we, by nature, this is an elite luxury good, and we keep it that way. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But at any rate, figuring out how to create opportunities for people was really what Amherst drove for me. So I'll try and frame later some of the big trends that we're seeing in K-12 and higher ed based on our work.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean-Luc Charles, and I'm a pastor, so community person, and I work in HR. So when I think about the impact of Amherst on education, well, they used to publish, the school published when I came in, the SAT scores, math and English or whatever that other side was. And I remember looking down and I remembered my score and I realized, okay, I got in by a squeak, okay? So I'm saying that to say that coming to Amherst was a realization of how extremely different my experience in education was. Previous to Amherst, everything was very rote and focused learning. I got here and there was the sense of, no, you have a brain and we're empowering you and we'll give you what you need. But there was the assumption that you can do the work here, you can think, and you belong. So the 4 years was about absorbing that and really living into that and figuring out, okay, what did that mean for me in my story? But it meant coming from a very, very different kind of place and a very different expectation of what I was going to do with my life and with my brain.
Morning, everyone. I'm Brian Harrigan. My story, there's threads throughout with our other panelists. So I should not have been here. At least that was my perception. My parents are both public school teachers. They went to UMass and North Adams State, so I was not supposed to go to the elite private school down the street. I was a public school kid. I got in, but I still didn't believe that I was supposed to be here. I had, as we all had, an intro English class, 10 books, one a week, 2-page papers at the end of each week. I handed in the first one, and the professor writes to me, I too read the book. What do you think? C-. Now think back. C- was as close to an F as Amherst ever gave, right? Yes. Right? And then she said, see me. So I went to Sam. She was a visiting professor. I actually do not remember her name. And I wish I did. I wish I could look her up because she said, come see me. And for every week thereafter, I would pre-write the essay on Tuesday. She'd get it back to me on Thursday, and then I'd make a bunch of revisions and get it back to her on Friday, right? We did that 9 times. And I run a charter school now where we don't have grades. Think Hampshire College. That's my charter school. But I ended up with an A- in that class. I'm like, my goodness, I've never been so proud of a grade. What she taught me more than anything was that, yes, I can think, but most importantly, that I belonged here. So that's why I do this work, is to try to make sure that kids who think they're a fraud know that they belong.
That's good. That's good. Oh, that's good.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about belonging. My name is Doug Norry. I have spent the last 30 years in independent schools. I've been head of school at Triangle Day School in Durham, North Carolina for the last 11. So I think that my exposure to this is an inch wide and a mile deep. And a lot of what I'll say today is sort of rooted in my experience at TDS. I think that for most of my career, I've been a teacher, a science teacher. And so I think back, and I'm looking at Charlie Glassenberg. I mean, I think back to Tekla Harms in the geology department, structural geology labs. I think she taught me how to be a science teacher. She was less concerned with what we knew and more concerned with how we came to know it, and being able to sort of find the evidence in the field to support our hypotheses. So I thought I knew about science when I got here and realized that I didn't, and I learned a lot of that from members of the geology department. I describe and try to mold our school as a sort of a K through 8 liberal arts experience, which is to say that a lot of exposure, and we teach kids how to think and how to write and how to speak and how to advocate for themselves. That's rooted in my Amherst experience. My 10-word elevator pitch about our school is that it's a place where every child feels known and valued and connected and loved. And the only reason why I was a geology major here is because that's how the department made me feel. It was one big family. So when I think back about what's important to me in education, it's those relationships, and that, you know, that in the geology department in particular really framed that for me for those 4 years.
Thank you. So as we met for several months to discuss this panel and talk about education, we had lively discussion and discovered that there's a lot to this topic. And obviously we can't discuss everything. And our goal today is probably not to give you any answers and to have you leave with more questions than when you came in. But we wanted to have an opportunity to discuss some of the topics that sort of sat on each person's heart. And so Seth is going to talk to us a little bit about key trends. Brian is going to talk to us a little bit about equity. Jean-Luc's going to talk to us a little bit about luxury. And Doug is going to talk to us about mental health. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to direct some questions towards each of them. They'll each chat for about 5 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll have a little bit more discussion. So would you like to start us off, Seth, with some of the key trends you see in higher ed and K to 12 education?
Absolutely. Thanks, Paula. And this is from observation from work as well as working in the charter school sector. In the K-12 world, we are still feeling the effects of COVID. And it's not long COVID, it is academic achievement is still way down, in particular for the the kids who are furthest behind to start with. And that is a huge, huge issue. One bright spot just on the pedagogical side is, you may have heard about the science of reading, and many states have adopted this. It's basically phonics. It's the oversimplification. It is I believe, a criminal offense that 30 years of students have not been taught to decode words. And literacy is so damn important, and we're finally getting it. And by the way, the state that actually started this trend about a little less than 10 years ago was Mississippi, who was always the butt of everyone's jokes, and actually implemented this. And lo and behold, if you taught kids how to decode words and how they went together, as opposed to the whole language, which came out of testing it on kids in the Upper West Side of Manhattan through Columbia Teachers College, those kids tended to read pretty well. It's the kids who most needed it, who have been denied the science of structured literacy, who are finally getting it. So that's one bright spot. But we've got a long way to go coming back from COVID. What's interesting is, at the same time, you've got some demographic shifts going on. So we've seen flattening. We're going to see a decline due to lower birth rates, which starts to hit the finances of districts. And for a while, it's been okay because there was what's called ESSER funding from the federal level. And so districts had more money, frankly, than they knew what to do with. And I think you could argue how well they spent it, whether it was spent effectively. But they're running out of that money. So you're going to see a lot of places where enrollment is down. So New York City has lost 20,000 students. They've gone to charters. They've gone out of the city. Homeschooling has doubled, which is a really interesting piece of this. So some of these districts are going to have to make really hard choices. And you're going to start to hear about school closure and so on. So you've got a huge challenge pedagogically. You've got less resources to do it. And then the final piece is, we've got a teacher shortage. This is a very good labor market. It's really hard to find teachers. And so teacher shortage may be the wrong term because people are being hired. But what it means is you're hiring less prepared, less qualified, and often less talented. You're going deeper into the labor pool to get teachers. And so district administrators are very aware of the fact that they don't have necessarily the team that they need to do all this. So this is all very challenging. These are the challenges the K-12 system is facing. Just on the teacher shortage piece, it's only going to get worse. If you think about being a teacher now relative to your peers who are working from home, you can't go decide when you go to the bathroom. And meanwhile, your friend's calling, so, oh, you can't talk? I'm going to Pilates now. Like, that is not a great value proposition. So the only way I believe that you're going to really get at that is to really think about more flexible roles as opposed to one teacher, 25 students, and beyond. But that is not what we're seeing in most places. People say AI is going to solve everything. We were talking about this at breakfast. I think I think AI is going to have a big impact. We'll see if it actually helps folks who are further ahead or further behind, and there's a lot of different views on what's going to happen there. What is interesting is you'll see, I go to these conferences and people like Sal Khan from Khan Academy are talking about AI is going to be the robot tutor for everyone. And what I think it misapprehends, and when I'm at these conferences, it's always people who liked school, were good at school, and found it easy to learn. And so now they're saying, well, I just need to explain that algorithm and you'll figure that out. And it misses the fact that belonging, motivation, and just the whole scaffolding of base knowledge is really important to kids who are really far behind. So that's my skepticism on AI. Very quickly on higher ed, that same demographic cliff is hitting. We peaked, and so we'll talk a lot about Amherst. The elite schools of NESCAC, Ivy Leagues, is such an infinitesimally small part of our higher education system. There are 3,000 plus institutions, and for a long time, because of demographic tailwinds and the fact that more and more adults were going to school, you could just stick your bucket out and get enrollments. It was really easy. And while they did that, they would crank the price lever because that was fine. Well, in 2011, enrollments, or 2013, enrollments flattened out. And you're actually going to see them start to decline. We have way too many institutions and programs at those institutions because people started new online programs, new program in this, chasing too few students. And so you're starting to see significant competition. That has been reflected in the net price. So net price finally started to come down across all institutions. You might not have felt that if you have kids here at Amherst. And you're seeing this competition. You're going to start to see closures. We've seen small schools close. You're going to see more. It's hard to, schools hang on for a long time, but there are a lot of schools, particularly small schools, that are in really precarious financial positions. So you're going to see a lot of competition amongst those to get students, and sometimes it becomes, Jeff Swift was talking about the race to the bottom that you can fall into, so it's very, very tough. Even though net pricing started to come down, it's still incredibly expensive. And so there's still pretty broad skepticism about the value of degree across the country. And traditionally, it has always been the ROI on a college degree was absolutely the way to, it was a ticket into the middle class. It would increase your earnings. It actually modulates your sort of risk of being unemployed, all good stuff. But as the gap, the sort of ROI has gotten smaller as the price has gotten higher and higher. And so I think schools really have to think about what is the value proposition they're providing. We were talking about, liberal arts at a highly selective school, great. If you're not getting real skills that you can transfer into a job and you're not at a selective school, the outcome is not great. And if you don't complete, the outcome is terrible because that's non-dischargeable debt, and we have a huge college completion problem as well. So that's kind of what's going on in the higher ed space. There's going to be a lot of pain and suffering in many institutions is my doom and gloom for higher ed. Now, within the small school elite world, our 1994 class has a lot of kids who are people have kids in college, going to college, and so frequent topic is who gets in and why. And I think this may feed into where you're going. Let's make no mistake, Amherst College is a luxury good. That by definition, we sort of maintain quality by how many people we say no to. And if you really are, so this is where I call people on, are you really about expanding access to high quality education? If you, by definition, measure your quality by how many people you say no to, that's a pretty hard circle to square. And so you'll hear all these debates, legacy. Well, we got away with legacy. It's all decisions about who gets to get into this elite club. And there's value in being in this elite club. Look, we come to certain campuses to recruit, and we don't go to certain other campuses. That is absolutely an advantage you have of getting into this club. And then the admissions department has so many qualified applications, they have to decide who gets into the club. And that is a very contested subject, which I will not get into yet. So.
All right,
Thanks,
great.
So Brian's going to talk to us about equity, specifically what the state of equity in education is today.
And it builds off of where Seth finished, right? What ends up happening in our institutions, 9 through 12, right? What happens at the high school level is that we increasingly will sort students by age, by grade, and by ability, and we're going to sort those different categories so narrowly that you'll end up with a level at the bottom where the kids are predominantly black, brown, and disabled, right? So are we truly caring about all students when we create a system where what you're really trying to do is to prepare the elite students for the elite schools, right? So when we start to talk about equity, we're saying, all right, all means all. We should not measure the success of a school based on, the top 60%. What if we actually looked at the performance of the school based on the kids who are struggling, right? So when you look at the different rankings, and these things matter in lower ed as much as they matter in higher ed, right? We are all in a competitive space for students and resources and teachers and other things. When you start to look at what are the schools that are traditionally ranked the highest, those are the schools that are arguably sorting kids more and investing more and more resources at the top of the performance ladder, right? So I live in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Hopkinton is every year ranked in Massachusetts in the top 3, 4, 5 schools in the state. I was the principal of Natick High School when one of our school board members said, hey, can you figure out what Hopkinton's doing? Because we need to do that. I said, all right, I live in town. I'll dig into it. I'll figure out what the algorithm that they're using, the methodology. What it came down to is Hopkinton has an extraordinary AP psychology teacher. 85% of the seniors take AP psychology and get a 4 or 5 on the exam, which is wonderful. No one should say anything other than that is something to be proud of. But the algorithm is so tilted to AP and College Board that ultimately this school system is ranked among the best in the country. And that doesn't look at all at the 15% of the kids not in that AP class or other kids that are seriously struggling. So I'm back to the school board. I said, I do not think that our answer to this question is to invest in College Board. Like, can you imagine in any other instance where a for-profit company would create curriculum and a test and we would all sign
technically
up?
not for profit, but they do have about $1 billion in surplus every year.
They certainly feel like a for-profit company. So we've totally bought into it. Like if Google called us up tomorrow and said, hey, we have something new in your math curriculum, do we do it? The answer would be no. So this is when we start to talk about equity, we're saying, what can we do to invest in the kids who are struggling and recognize that, yes, in some cases we're going to raise all boats, but in other cases we're going to chip away at the privilege of those at the top. And that's when you start to get the fights that you're seeing, like in the city of Cambridge right now. They just fired their superintendent. The superintendent job is not a safe space for anybody as you try to fight these culture wars, right? But one of the things that the superintendent did wrong, according to the community, was try to rein in the sorting that happens with their highest level math curriculum and math placement. The school that I'm at right now, this is my second year as the head of school at Parker Charter. We explicitly say all means all. We do not have any leveling in our classes, so all students are together. It poses a challenge, obviously, for teachers to differentiate effectively, but that is what good education and good instruction is. And the idea here, we also don't have grades. It's all performance-based assessment, standards-based feedback. And the idea here is all of the kids can get there, and it's essential for the kind of equity of the students in the room. And this impacts, obviously, Black, brown, low-income, disabled kids the most, but it's going to obviously benefit others who struggle as well.
Thank you. So now Jean-Luc is going to speak to the luxurification, that's your vocabulary word for today, of education.
All right, luxurification, wow. Really what I want to talk about is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why white people should care, right? Why it's important to you, actually, to particularly in this country. So let me start by saying the only thing that race tells you about a person is their racialized experience. That's it. That's the only thing that it tells you. And yet, that racialized experience actually has incredible impact on a lot of other things. And there are people with better grasp of the statistics around healthcare, around life expectancy, and a whole bunch of other things that really have nothing to do with a person as a person, but just their racialized experience. The connection is that luxury is a class thing, right? And class is deeply associated with racial caste. So when we make the kind of education that has to do with being able to think, the liberal arts, broad capacity around that, when we make that a luxury good, what we're really doing is we're really isolating that skill set to only a certain percentage of people and giving them access, even though their racial caste really has nothing to do with their ability to contribute to the society, their thinking, their skills, or even their interests. So at the end of the day, that kind of false narrative puts us all at risk because we're not actually allowing the best and brightest among us to help us, to lead us, to train us, to develop us, so that we can solve the very, very, very real and not even around the corner, but present issues that we're facing, like global climate change and other things that are actually quite pressing on all of us in our humanity. So, from the 15,000-foot perspective, there's a connection. I mean, how do you sort it out on the ground? It's hard to say, but, from what this means for somebody like myself who pastors immigrant kids, as I try to figure out, okay, how do I get my kids, to have the kinds of experiences and access to the kinds of places that I had because of Amherst, and then dealing with the kinds of boxes that they're in pre-K, in kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade, and realizing that the energy that it takes to move that, because the structure is racialized and really is there to keep out the vast majority of them. That's the kind of struggle that happens on the ground, and that changes for every family, right? That's very different for each person, but that's kind of how I approach my pastoral work, is thinking, okay, what am I doing? What are we doing, right? We're talking about heaven, okay, but people are living right here and right now. What are we doing on the right here and right now that is connecting that heavenly hope? We say, okay, God can change things. How do I bring that into this day to day? Because I've got this kid who can't read, or I've got this kid who's in the fourth grade who's struggling with very basic things because they've been racialized. So that's where the connection is for me.
Thank you. And Doug is going to speak to us about the mental health of our students right now.
Thanks, Paula. I do want to just say a few things. I think it's widely accepted that we are in a mental health crisis, or at least our young adults and teens are in a mental health crisis, and probably particularly the ones that are feeling much more privilege, or have come from much more privilege and are applying to the Amherst of the world. There's a lot of data to suggest that. I think there is some pushback about, maybe we're just doing a better job of recognizing it and labeling it and treating it, and some of that is true. But I've been done a lot of thinking about this. At my school, we see this a lot, and so we've doubled the size of our counseling staff, just as one example. I've read 2 books in the last year related to this, and a lot of what I'll say in the next few minutes is rooted in those books. One is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which is getting a lot of play right now, and the other, maybe a little bit lesser known, is Never Enough by Jennifer Wallace. They're great books. If you're going to read one, I would read Wallace's book. It resonated more with me. But I'll just offer 3 quick ideas. One, just the excessive pressure to excel, right? And I think, parents, put a lot of pressure on their kids to excel, and we have sort of curated and professionalized childhood to a rather absurd point. So we see this in youth sports, and we see this in activities. And I think, when parents see an uncertain future for their kids, the life raft is, climbing to the top, right? So that certainly puts a lot of pressure on the kids. And what Wallace would say, beyond just the pressure, is that kids start to feel like they are validated for what's on their resume and their performance, as opposed to just who they are. And that's a problem, So, what's the antidote to this? The antidote to this, according to Wallace, would be what she calls mattering. And you've heard a couple of people up here talk about that. I talked about that. I felt like I mattered in the geology department. And mattering is obviously, as it sounds, sort of like loving your kids unconditionally for who they are, as opposed to the grade that they bring. And I apologize if some of this sounds like parenting advice. I'm looking at and realizing most of you, the ship has probably sailed. But thank you for indulging me. We all nod, and it's like, well, of course I love my kids unconditionally, but when you survey kids, 70% of them say that they feel more loved when they do better in school. Right. And so like when I thought about that as a parent, I'm like, yeah, I'm sure my kids will be in that 70%, even though I love them unconditionally. So that's point one. I think point two is, height would bring up, and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but just our obsession with screens and social media. And I would, height focuses on the younger generation. I would say all of us, I look around the room before, and again, I don't mean this I just put it out there, we are 40 of us in a room. Before this panel started, the vast majority of people were on their phones, as opposed to talking to people that we see once every 5 years. So, and one of Haidt's points is that these devices are experience blockers, right? So there's sort of if you're an economist, I guess there's an opportunity cost to the 5 hours that you spend on Instagram per day. I think there's the social deprivation, there's the sort of attention fragmentation, and I think we feel this as 52-year-olds, and imagine it's just much more acute, I think, with our 14 through 17-year-olds. So I don't know what the solution is. I mean, in his book, it's very sort of cut and dry. It's just don't give them phones until they hit high school, don't let them on social media until they're 16. Part of the problem as parents, right, is we feel this collective action, like we feel powerless. Everybody's got this, everybody's doing this, we're in this like hyper-competitive environment. But maybe the trend is shifting toward the free-range children and the let-grow movement and away from these screens. The third point, which actually might be the most salient in my mind, is that I think we've been hearing the term helicopter parents for decades, but helicopter parents have turned into snowplow parents, right? So we want to get in front of anything, and in one of the books, there's a really good analogy in talking about the immune system, right? And I mean, I'm not a doctor, but my understanding of the immune system is that it needs to see some pathogens in order to recognize pathogens later, right? So think about our psychological immune system needs to be activated. That anti-fragility muscle needs to be activated so that our children can get through the disappointment that comes with the occasional teasing or whatever it is. And if we are so far out in front that we shield them from any of that, then I think well-intentioned parents are preventing the development of resilience in our kids. Put much more succinctly by a former boss of mine, we all want our kids to be good problem solvers. We just don't want them to have any problems. I think that's how a lot of us parent, frankly. And so I don't know, how that changes. But, I think, there are maybe some deeper concerns that Jean-Luc is talking about, that Brian is talking about. This mental health for our kids is something that more people are paying attention to, and my hope, and I do think when it comes to solutions, I do think we're talking about parents and just how we prepare our kids, not just for the Amherst of the world, but for life. So my hope is that the tide turns a little bit on that.
Thanks, Doug. So we've heard about trends, we've heard about equity, we've heard about luxury and mental health, and you're all wondering why I am here, besides just to look beautiful and have you look at me, of course, as the only female on the panel. As I mentioned, my name is Paula Castner. I actually have all of our gentlemen's sort of life experiences rolled into one currently. I spent 30 years working in public education, doing everything I could to bring advantages and opportunities to students who couldn't have it. 4 years ago, I had an opportunity to transition to the exact opposite. I work with an academy called the Art of Problem Solving, where people pay to send their students to get extra math, language arts, computer science, and regular science because they feel that the public schools are not providing what their students need. So as you can imagine, a lot of internal conflict as I was, deciding whether or not to take this job, because it seems like it was the antithesis of everything I've spent 30 years doing with my life. What I finally came down to was that we were providing things for students that were lacking. And this was one of the few places they could get it. And having students, children of my own who are on the autism spectrum, one of whom I had to pull out of the public school system at 13 so that he could get the type of education he needed, which was he was a 13-year-old boy who needed to do calculus and physics, and the schools had no way of providing that. So I ended up homeschooling him and doing a combination of things with community college and UMass Lowell. And the upshot is that 2 weeks ago, at the age of 19, he graduated with his master's in education. The point of that story was that this was part of what helped me to jump on board with art of problem solving, because a lot of their children are children like mine who need some place to go, because as our friends have, shared with us, the public school system is where my heart is at, but it is broken, right? There's a lot of things it doesn't provide. Now, the other thing at my school that's interesting that I wrestle with is, what Jean-Luc was talking about in terms of luxury, because of course, the families who can send their students to my school have money, right? They can pay for their students to go to extra school on top of their public education. Now, Art of Problem Solving offers scholarships. We do everything we can to get into the community, to provide opportunities for students of color to be able to participate, even if they don't have money. But as Jean-Luc pointed out, it's not just money, right? If you're a single parent, transportation becomes an issue. If you're a single parent, time and being able to bring your student becomes an issue. And so it's still broken at the art of problem solving, even though we're trying to provide this opportunity. And so what ends up happening is a lot of our families, no matter what their backgrounds who come, they're the students with that anxiety that, Doug was talking about, because their parents really want their students to excel. They want them to get what they didn't have in terms of opportunity. So a lot of my students, I spend time in my office with them trying to help them to let everything go, to tell them they're not going to die because they didn't get an A, or that, they didn't do everything perfectly. But it's really hard for them because there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure. And, as Doug talked about, I talk about this with my staff all the time, is that these students have no resilience. They have no sort of mental capacity for understanding internal strength, because everything has been so protected for them, while at the same time they're having all that pressure. So everything that we have been talking about today, I live with every single day in my office and in the classrooms with my students that I work with. And I do a lot of training with my staff on a daily basis on how do we deal with inequity, how do we deal with mental health, how do we deal with, a broken system, as we are providing education in a for-profit, opportunity. So that's sort of my thoughts background. We have about 25 minutes, and we really do have just 25 minutes. I've been told I'm going to be given the warning at the 10-minute mark so that nobody misses the president's talk. So, but what we would like to do is have an opportunity to hear from you. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, as I mentioned, Sarah's going to be our microphone runner. So if you raise your hand, she'll come to you. Please give us your name and what class you graduated from. So I hope folks have some questions, some thoughts, because our panelists said they really want active conversation. And I've got to deliver that. So I really need you guys to kind of game up here.
All right.
So Sarah.
All right.
I have two down here. Right. So.
Excellent.
Hi, everyone. Seth from Class of 94. Great to see you all and hear your perspective, journeys. I'm from Canada, and one thing that strikes me in hearing a lot of what you're saying is this focus on ranking, okay? Ranking of students, but also ranking of institutions. And this country is obsessed with ranking, and we've heard that the systems for ranking are largely arbitrary and totally invalid, and by organizations that often know nothing about what they're ranking. So is there a way out of this nefarious cycle? Because I think it really does... it's not necessarily productive, right? And it leads to some negative consequences. Yeah, we don't have the same system in Canada, so fortunately, not yet.
I don't know if you all recall, I remember Peter Pouncey saying that the rankings are a total sham, but it's still good to be at the top. So that's my only comment, right? I mean, it has an effect. There's no doubt about it. And that same ranking even affects, I'm at a charter school. It's a school of choice, which is a wonderful thing. It gives people, we're a public school. We do not charge tuition, but those rankings matter a great deal to us as well. Just as Seth was talking about, there's fewer teachers out there, there's fewer students. We looked at 10 districts around us. 9 out of 10 had seen declining enrollment, most of those kids going to homeschool. So those rankings matter, and unfortunately it influences decisions that we make.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting you bring up Canada, because top students go to large schools that don't turn away a lot of students, and actually the challenge is not getting in, it's getting through, is the way I understand it. And we have the total opposite system. We talked about the great inflation. I don't think it's gotten any better. Ben Lieber can say if it's gotten any better. It is all about, and this is where it ties back into the pressure. The pressure is get into this place. But unlike some countries where it's just purely a test, which has its own issues, but it creates almost more anxiety because you're going to evaluate my whole self, not just how I did on the test. Well, I got to do all these things to get into this place. And then at some level, I remember people work hard in school, but it's not that hard to get out. Right. And a lot of the employers just come and look for students. They might look at your transcript, but it's all about getting into the club as opposed to getting access to the school and working your way through. But the reality is the rankings matter. And the only way you're going to stop it, one would be to say, we're going to expand access and everyone has to get through, and the challenge is getting the diploma. I think that's going to be a tough change. Or you could have everyone in the NESCAC say, we are not going to submit our data to U.S. News and World Report. That would be a bold move. You have to do it together because it's an arms race. Yep. That's the only way out. And you're seeing some schools, I forget, one of the medical schools might have done. So that's the only way you get out of that.
The other thing is grassroots movements. We have more power than we think. And one of the things that I do is every year I have a college planning seminar for all of my families that come to my academy. And I tell them that they should not send their kids to places like Amherst and Harvard and Yale.
You're not going to get invited back to moderate.
But what I try and help them to see is that their children can get good college educations through any path because it's all about them and the work they put in. So my son ended up going to a community college in UMass Lowell, and he's got a master's in education, right? And he's actually a far better teacher than I am as his mother. And I went to Amherst, and I learned a lot at Amherst. But I try and help these families and a lot of our families are Asian families, and growing up Korean, I'm allowed to say this, we really like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. And so I spend a lot of time telling them it's okay to look at other schools, and community colleges are great, and technical colleges are fabulous, And so I sort of feel that if we can help counter some of this perception, because what rankings does, it makes people think that those are the only schools that exist. And true story, my mother still hasn't forgiven me for coming to Amherst instead of going to Princeton, because Princeton's the only thing that, existed for her. And so I feel like we have a tendency to always think top down. How do we change what's at the top? But the fact of the matter is most of the change in the United States has happened from bottom up, those grassroots movements. So I don't know if that's something to think about. Before we get to those two, someone over here had a hand?
Yes.
Yeah,
Stephen.
Stephen, would you?
Thank you. Thank you, distinguished board, for everything that you're doing.
Doctor.
I too experienced the sense of not, why am I here at Amherst? I born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. And if you've ever seen the movie Boys in the Hood, then I'm Trey in Boys in the Hood, where I had great parents who forced education on me. But that's like forcing a kid to eat ice cream. I just loved it. But there's something I've never been able to understand, and I'm hoping you can chime in on this. My wife and I teach a dance program. We use art, so I was biology major and theater and dance minor. And in the theater, I learned about body expression and things like that, and how to communicate non-verbally. And so now we travel and we teach kids about body language and how if you're angry, you don't have to yell, you can posture. And so you can be respectful to express your emotions. But I'm looking at these kids, which was me, and I'm saying I wish that there was a way that we can say, come to the school, get educated, but let's also be people who can work with you on those things that we don't teach in school. I see this integrated system that says this, and please help me with this. We take our kids to school to train them, give them knowledge. With that knowledge comes information. With that information comes a sense of, I know something more. When you mix in other backgrounds, now you have battles of, well, I know more than you. Now you have conflict between what two people know. And one of the key concerns is, if we truly believe in Darwinian evolution, then this conflict should be a great thing. And there should be survival of the smartest. But we all know that survival of the smartest is not really the best way to go. So what are we really educating our children to when we say, get the information, become smart, go to this elite college, get smart, so that when you're standing in front of someone else, you can think better than them. You can present your argument better than them. But we've never once asked, is your argument worth elevating over someone else's? So I'm very much interested in how education meets conflict resolution. So when we're saying you should be able to call me by my own pronoun, don't ever not call me by my pronoun. When we're teaching that you should be able to express who you are and never be judged for that in any harmful way, that is great. But how do we handle teaching people to deal with that sensitive thing of when conflict arises, how can you make it through the conflict and still be better as a group? How do we educate people into wisdom? Have we found a way to do that yet? Educate people into wisdom without encroaching upon their rights. How do we take the education system there?
That's good. I'll defer to the school leaders. I mean, I'll be honest with you. You're asking such a big question. We're asking a lot of educators already. So my initial response is, gosh, like if it's hard enough to get folks to teach the academic stuff, how are they going to lead them sort of spiritually? Now, I don't think there's a curriculum for it. I think it's school culture in the K-12 world. Higher ed's probably school culture as well. But how to create that culture, I don't know.
There's lots of curriculums for it. I don't know how successful they are. I do think you've seen over the last 20 years much less emphasis, at least in my world, a much less emphasis on academics and particularly certainly memorizing information, because now we all have these devices that we're all on a lot that can get us whatever information we want. I think we've seen a much greater emphasis on some of what we might call the softer skills, which is the interpersonal intelligence, how we get along with others, and also the core values of respect and integrity. And I think those are taking precedence in a lot of our schools, at least in sort of a lot of the independent schools where I've been, which is a good thing. Wisdom, that's a tough one. But Brian, you wanted to say something? I'll come back.
Yeah. As I reflect on my experience at Amherst, and then I've been teaching at and doing graduate work at a number of different Jesuit schools, and I don't think the separation of church and state in public schools does us any service. And I'm not saying that we should explicitly put God into the curriculum. I am saying that this notion at the Jesuit school where I started, Gonzaga College High School in D.C., an all-boys school, there was an explicit mission of helping young boys become men for others, and that's a Jesuit philosophy. So where is social justice in our educational system? I do feel like I've learned more at Boston College about how we use education to the benefit of our community and other people than I did here at Amherst. I did feel like Amherst was a bit of a competitive race to get better than everybody else, right? That's at least the sense that I had. And you leave with a sense of superiority that, yes, a responsibility perhaps, but more importantly, this was a very selfish endeavor, I felt.
Yeah, and Stephen, at my academy, if you were to come visit me, which everyone should come visit me in Waltham, Massachusetts, 1088 Lexington Street, the front door has a sign. It says, "You are about to enter an active learning environment." And then underneath it, it says, "By crossing this threshold, you agree to." And the very first thing is to behave respectfully. And then after that, it has a couple of other things about people's attitudes and demeanors. And I hold my staff and my students to that. And I think, Seth is correct when he says it's about that culture we create in the schools. And as, Doug said, a lot of schools now are starting to realize that we've always talked, you teach to the whole child. We all know we didn't teach to the whole child. But now they're actually starting to teach to the whole child and thinking about social and emotional well-being and intelligence and, the issues that these next generation are struggling with. And once again, I come back to, how do we teach them wisdom? By practicing it in the classrooms every day as educators with our students. Now, Seth is correct. Like, educators are asked to move the moon, and then we're held accountable because we can't control all the issues in the world. It's all the teacher's faults, right? But at the end of the day, it's our individual choices in the classroom. So like I tell my students all the time, I'm not here to teach you language arts. And they always look at me like I have 8 heads. They're like, why are we doing language arts? And I say, I'm here to teach you how to be critical thinkers. I'm here to teach you how to be better people. I'm here to teach you how to grow into the self that I know you are, that amazing you that you are. And language is going to be a byproduct, right? You're going to learn language arts along the way. And so, I think that we can't fix everything, but I think we can make attempts. And I think that's a lot of what I hope you're hearing, that, by having these conversations and us thinking about these issues then spurs us to ask ourselves, what can we do in our little sphere? Or, how can I be a part of this process? So we had 2 hands. So, yes. Yeah, I'm keeping an eye.
Hi, my name's Chris Palacios. I was in the class of 2004. I actually grew up in Mississippi, and I think that one thing about Mississippi that's very special is that because the people there stay, the teachers that are there, because now I live in Miami, and I have my own small educational consulting company, but the teachers in Mississippi they are from there, and they care about the kids that are there. And when you have these big cities that are not paying people what they need to be paid to live there, you're getting the lowest quality of teacher, and they are not caring about the children that are there. They have no ties to those children. And especially that's why programs like Teach for America and stuff like that really don't work. And it's been proven. Wendy Kopp's even said it.
Let me challenge you on that. What do you mean it didn't work?
It doesn't work when you put people that have no connection to the people in those towns. I did Teach for America. Yep. And so I know when I went to Texas to get training, they told me that I couldn't speak to the kids in that state in Spanish because the state had said that was not allowed, even though they were immigrants that had just gotten there.
Yeah, but that's not Teach for America's fault.
Teach for America can have an effect on what happens in those states. I believe that. You might not believe that, but I believe that. And also, the thing is that so now I live in Florida, and we have gotten rid of DEI completely. There's other states. And I work with students and families that are very worried about and concerned about these things because now they feel like there's nobody that's actually looking out for their children. Okay, very different from Mississippi, where I do feel that the teachers did look out for their children. And now you have DEI movement, removing DEI across this country that will affect education and will affect not only brown and black people, but disabled people, neurodivergent people. And this movement is moving across the United States. So what can we do to counteract that as graduates of Amherst College?
Look, community matters, right? I lived in Durham, North Carolina for 9 or 10 years, and there were people who taught, multi-generationally. And a lot of what Stephen was asking has to do with community. The challenge that we're experiencing now is there's a lack of resilience to be able to do what is in community, right? So there's a Haitian saying that the tongue and the teeth always have conflict. I mean, the reality is the teeth always win, right? Right? But the sense is they're still in the mouth, right? And I think what we're struggling now with is the ability to experience all of the nuances of conflict and still stay in community with each other. So, I understand that experience of a teacher who will see you in the supermarket. They know your grandmother. Like that inevitably will translate to the sense of I belong here and I matter to this person. So even though I might be failing, and even though I might have to repeat the grade, I still matter to this person, and that is everything.
Thank you. We had another hand over here. No more hand? Okay. So what? Can you wait for the microphone, please? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then this will be our last question because we've got 5 minutes. So.
My name's Awesome.
Yes, awesome. Of course.
Met many of you last night. Sort of told a little bit of my story. I grew up in St. Louis, having been an immigrant. First-generation immigrant, born in Pakistan. My parents had really no clue of the educational map, but obviously for them, education was the primary thing. They were the only two in families of 9 to achieve secondary education in their families. They both came as physicians. Very high expectations, but no roadmap. So we literally just followed the family right in front of us in 76. And I guess I was lucky or unlucky in the fact that they picked some very highfalutin private elementary school boroughs where John Hamm and Sam Altman went to school. I didn't even know about Amherst. I only applied because my best friend's dad went here, and he was potentially going to be here. I was going to go to Carleton because that's where my soccer coach went. I visited. I fell in love. And to this day, I've not worked as hard as I did at Burroughs. So from the perspective of everyone worked as hard as they did here to get to the next step, that was the opposite for me. I was let out of jail here, okay? I didn't work a day in my life while I was here. I wasted my parents' money, okay? I didn't get into the med school, the flyover country med school in my hometown that I wanted to go to, that I begged and pleaded to go to. I got into a Texas school, which I was an elitist snob about. There's no way I'm going to med school in Texas. I then went to all the highfalutin places, CHOP, Boston Children's, UCSF, Stanford, on and on and on. And I realized none of these things matter. None of it. It's how you're raised, who you're raised by. School may not actually be the solution for you at a given point in time. And I know that's one perspective, and not everyone has a luxury of that perspective. Because let's face it, you got to get somewhere, and some people don't have the means to make that choice, and you got to get there. But there are people who are on this track. They don't even need to. They should not be in high school. Okay, if they wasted the kind of money my parents spent on their high school, which is now what it costs, college tuition to go to these high schools, you're already starting from behind. Like, get a job. I mean, jobs are really, really, really important things. They taught me way more than any of this stuff. Anyway.
Good to see you.
No, thank you. And it is true that, we live in a world, right, where things are plaid. We like to make things black and white, but the fact of the matter is there's all these myriads of threads of different colors that come into any conversation that we're going to have. And we thank you for coming today to hang out with us. We hope we've given you some more things to think about. Definitely over the next 24 hours, if you see us out on the quad, feel free to stop any of us and have some conversation. And we hope that everybody has a fabulous rest of your reunion.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Paula.